Okay, we are in the 22nd book. We're just moving through this.
Yeah.
The problem is, of course, we're the 34th week into this, so, we're at the Song of Songs. You guys have seen this before, but it's the last of our poetry books. In fact, it's the last of our poetry books over there. We have the 5 books under poetry: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastics, and now Song of Solomon, as the bookshelf says, or Song of Songs. It's interchangeable. You'll find old manuscripts with that title, both Song of Solomon and Song of Songs. We're also done with the top shelf. So next week we drop down to the second shelf and we go into the prophets, the 17 prophets. So we're heading towards the end of the Old Testament here. We've got the 17 Old Testament prophets left after this book. So this is a good thing. Like the other poetry books, it's a little difficult to teach because of all the different styles of writings that are in it. This one adds a few extras. We were familiar with, the proverbs and the idioms and the different types of styles, but we get this erotic love poetry, and that's basically what this book is. We'll get into that. It's the Song of Songs, and we'll see why that's said there. As you can see through some of these descriptions, we get another added one, not only the exotic poetry, but we also get what they call wasf. It's WASF. It's an Aramaic word, and it's a different style of poetry as well. And it's when you describe something in poetry using nature, like a giraffe, a bird, a gazelle, which this book does. It does a lot of that type of descriptive writing. When you read it, you're thinking, it doesn't mean much to us because we're not used to complimenting our women. You look like a mare, So we don't say, and that is one of the ones that he does. He compliments her like.
Unless you didn't say heifer.
Yeah, true. So he picks. So it is a little different than we're used to culturally. We don't see that in our what would I say, courting or dating. Let's go ahead and get into this here. Oh yeah, I did want to say that there are 30 to 40 wasps, and that's why I brought it up. As you get to it, we're going to teach this, but probably different than I've taught a lot of them. There's only 8 chapters, so it's not a really long book. And I've taken a lot of the books and I've hit every chapter to give you guys at least the story and content of what's going on in every chapter. So you've heard most content in every book. Some of the books we didn't quite do that way. Psalms, because there's 150. These poetry books are harder to do that with. This one, even though it's short, we could have. I was sitting there struggling. How do I want to teach this? Like, there's probably 3 to 4 different ways I had in my mind. This is the way I'm going to lay this out. We're going to step through this stuff, this book. I decided more on structure than content because, we'll see why. We'll just take a look and see why. We always try to come up with one word for a book, an uber word that describes the total book. And I wanted to pick romance, and I Googled to find pictures of romance and love. None of them were biblically appropriate, so I had to change. I put divine in front of romance, and I got this picture here of divine romance. So I cut and pasted it into this slide. This is really a great uber word for this book because it is a love story. It's a love story, and you could actually almost call the best description I would find to describe this book. It's a love opera, because you're going to see different people in this book having their opportunity to sing different poetry or different songs throughout this book. There's music poetry, there's actual songs, there's song and dialogue. It's like an opera that tells a vague story. It's not very explicit. It's not. It's not once upon a time, or it's not even a story you can retell. It is a story. I suspect the reason an opera describes it the best is, for me, I've only seen one opera, but they're hard to understand. I mean, if you don't know the backstory and what they're trying to sing about in an opera, you probably don't know the story. Song of Psalms is the same way. So the Hebrew word for this is hest, and it's better than. So this is a love story, but hest is used in this book 248 times. Actually, it's not. It's used in the Bible, in the Old Testament, 248 times. It's used over and over in this book. I did not get how many times, but when it uses the word love, it's not, we know from studying the stories of Jesus, agape love, which is unconditional love, phileo love, which is brotherly love. This is a deeper, and it's hard to get deeper than agape, which is unconditional. We call agape love the hardest love to produce. Only God can produce that. Hesed is a different word in the Hebrew language, and it means as this slide says, covenant love. God loves, and he's never going to not love because he's under a covenant contract to love. And that's what a marriage is. And that's kind of what this story of Songs of Song is. It's a marriage covenant. And we're going to see that as we go through there. So I would have used hest instead of just divine love or divine romance. Well, I found divine romance before and then I found hest when I was reading more, and I said, I'm going to use this too. So that's why you got it. And I think it does a better job of explaining the whole book. We know that that Solomon wrote a lot of Psalms and a lot of Proverbs and a lot of songs, 1,005. This here is one of 1,005. We don't have the other 1,004. We only have one, unless you call the two Psalms he wrote songs, because it could be. But we're missing a lot of his content, right? Because he did write two Psalms. So, but this is the Song of Songs, and we're gonna get into that here. I wanted to put the very first verse in the book, and once again, it's a very short verse. It says, "The Song of Songs, which is Solomon." And why this is important, and we learn a lot from this. I must have read 3 or 4 commentaries, and there are so many opinions about who the author of this book is. And I scratch my head at these in-depth thoughts of why they say someone else wrote this book, when the very first book says Song of Songs, which is Solomon. I mean, that it tells you. Why is it so hard to give this to Solomon? Well, the reason it is if you read through this book, it is describing a love between a man and a woman, like a unified single love. Well, Solomon had 700 wives, and he had 300 concubines. How can you have this much dedicated love for this individual when you have 1,000 other ladies in your harem? We know that in fact, most of Solomon's marriages were political, and they were, back in those days, that's how the world handled peace. They married into peace, and Solomon followed that, not because God condoned it. As we said, everything in the Bible, just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean it's from God. That is not the way God would have done it. God would have protected them without all of those marriages. But anyway.
Do some say that was his first wife? It could have been his first wife?
Some say it's his first wife. The problem with that is First Kings does not say that. First Kings says his first wife was the wife of Pharaoh. It's his first marriage. He built a palace for her. At the time, that was his first wife, and the Bible says that. It could have been his first true love, which other people think is. It's kind of really interesting. As you read this opera, that were these 8 chapters of this opera, she falls in love with a shepherd. He's not in his kingly robe and crown and all that. He's going through his land, and sees her in this love story, and she sees him, and she thinks he's a shepherd boy or shepherd man, and he sees her as a shepherd woman, and they fall in love. And then the story goes where they fall in love, they have this whole courtship's going on, and when he's going to marry her, before he's going to marry her, well, after they know they fall in love, he has to leave, and he leaves. And when he leaves, he goes back to Jerusalem, and he's the king. When he returns to pick her up for the wedding, he comes as the king. That's the first time she sees him, and he's a king. He's not a shepherd boy. This shepherd boy she fell in love with is actually the king. Does that remind you of anything?
Yeah, a lot of Hallmark movies.
I was kind of thinking of Christ's first coming as a shepherd, a servant.
Any idea his age? Any indication as to his age?
The thought is, so we know it's during his 40-year reign, and as we talked about in the past, these books are, to me, are out of order. He wrote Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. Song of Songs, I believe, and I think the Bible backs this up, is his first book. So he was probably 16 or 17 when David died and became king. So he was probably 17 or 18. He was very young when he first became a king. He wrote, I think, Song of Solomon's in his late teens to early 20s, and then he wrote Proverbs in the bulk, in the bulk height of his reign, and all the wisdom that Proverbs spills out, and Ecclesiastes, vanity, all is vanity. I mean, it's in his older years when he's looking back on his life and saying, why, right? So I kind of wish we would have, as when we cannoned it, we'd have put Song of Songs, then Proverbs, then Ecclesiastes. But that's a good question, because I think he was very, very young, but he was still married, as Kim had brought up, to the Pharaoh's daughter. So, but like I said, when she fell in love with him, she thought he was a shepherd. It's kind of like, and this is why, and we're going to go through the different interpretations of what people think this book represents. But to me, it has so many foreshadowings. I'll tell you what I believe once we lay out all the possibilities. But there's so many foreshadowings of Christ. Now, we know that as we studied so far through the Old Testament, there's a lot of Christophanies. And that's where we actually see Christ. He takes a form of an angel, or he takes, a burning bush. These are Christophanies where Christ is actually interacting with mankind. There's no Christophanies in the Song of Songs, but there's foreshadowings. And there's a difference between a Christophany, which is an absolute appearance of Christ in a representative way in the Old Testament, where a foreshadowing is a picture of a Christ likeness. And that's what this is. I mean, Christ is our sacrificial lamb. He even says, my sheep know my voice, that my sheep hear my voice and they know me, right? So he acts as a shepherd of the church, right? And then, but we also know in the second coming, he's going to come back as a king. So that's this layout here of the Song of Songs. Now, Song of Songs, I also brought up the fact that we've learned in Proverbs what the difference between a proverb is and an idiom. Song of Songs is a Hebrew idiom. And if you don't know that, you don't feel the full intent of that statement. We know that the Bible says King of Kings. Well, there's lots of kings. There's lots of Hebrew kings. There was throughout the nation. But there is only one King of Kings. An idiom, King of Kings, means above all. It's a King of Kings. He's the king above all kings. Holy of Holies in the temple and the tabernacle. We know there's multiple layers of holiness as you approach God, but there's only one Holy of Holies. So when they put those words together in that fashion, it's a Hebrew idiom meaning it's the top. It's the, and those, so when they say Song of Songs is the title of this book, yes, there's lots of songs and poems, but this is above them all. This is the song of all songs, okay? And so I think the first statement in the book sets the tone for us a lot. This is the most important song that is written in Hebrew, and it's written by Solomon. And that's kind of what I think. Lots of people don't think that. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that think it's written in Solomon's style or about Solomon, sometime in the future written backwards about the history of it. I don't know why they have to try to shoehorn that in. It doesn't work for me. What it does for them is it explains, as you see this love story fold out, there's lots of chapters or lots of parts in it that you say, that doesn't sound like Solomon. So you try to say, who else could it be? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think just because we can't see Solomon in it after he wrote Ecclesiastes doesn't mean he couldn't have written it when he was 18. You know, that's his heart, right? So, Solomon's mentioned in here a number of times, and I just gave us a couple examples here. And he's mentioned in chapter 3, verse 6 through 11, and chapter 8, which is the final chapter of it. He's mentioned again. So I guess I'm just providing you these chapters and verses to say, yes, not all of the book sounds like what we know of his reign, because we studied his reign in Second Kings, in Chronicles. We saw him, and we go, we know some of the hard things, or some of the things that we may not see as loving and biblical that he did, especially in his older reign. But he's mentioned throughout this book, so I think that you have to answer that. You say, if you say he didn't write it, why is he mentioned so many times in this book? So this is kind of the overview. We talked a little bit about this, but I left a question mark. I said the author, Solomon, but it's not unanimous. So there are people who believe this is an unknown author. There's only 8 chapters in here. It's a very, very small book. In fact, it's the smallest book that we've done so far. The whole thing is written in Hebrew. Even though we have some Arabic style poetry in it, those poems are still in Hebrew. They're written in Hebrew. We've talked about his 40-year reign a few times. The theme of this book is God designs romantic love and marriage to be enjoyed, cherished, and protected. This book was highly debated on whether it should be in the Bible at all. I'll say that from a Hebrew perspective. From a Protestant or even a Christian perspective, not so much. We accepted the whole canonization of the Hebrew Bible. Once it was solidified as the Hebrew canon Bible after the cross, we accepted all of that because Jesus and the disciples quoted from almost every book in the Old Testament. So we can get, if they weren't God's word, Jesus wouldn't have quoted them as God saith, you know. So we can accept it in there. But prior to the Christians making the New Testament, which has the Old and the New Testament in our Bible, there was debate over what books belonged in the Old Testament. And of course, we know there's 2 books that never mentions God, right? Does anybody remember what they are?
What did you say?
2 books that never mention the word God.
Esther.
Esther and this one. So these are the only 2 books that don't mention God. And so there's a lot of debate saying they're not about God. They don't belong in the Bible. Would they had a lot of people who, yes, it screams of God. And I think the book of Esther and Song of Songs does scream of the love of God, even though it doesn't, say Yahweh or Yehovah or even Elohim. It doesn't mention and talk about God. It is truly just a love story between a man and a woman. But the overarching theme of this is God's picture of what a marriage should be, because a marriage is a picture of God's love for mankind. So, see, I have here 7 times there are 15 different animals mentioned, and there's 15 to 16 different locations mentioned, like in Jerusalem, Hebron, all these different places. A lot of ancient poetry that's very poetic and allegorical don't really mention real places. One of the things I like about the Bible that's different than some other religious books is every place that's mentioned in the Bible is a real place. It's a real city, a real town, not all books, religious books, can do that. They make, I mean, the Book of Mormon, the Quran, they make things up. They say things that don't exist. We've had that accusation about the Bible lots of times in history, but archaeologists have always disproved them, which is another great thing about the Bible, right? History proves the Bible, not disproves it. Where not every religion can claim that, make that claim. So, and the main key verse for this is chapter 8, the very last chapter, verse 6. Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal in your arms, for love is as strong as death. Its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. All the verses talk like that. I mean, that's why I was going to teach it like chapter by chapter and pick out verses. The whole 8 chapters is just, I won't say it. As a man, I was going to say, yeah, exactly. So women could have ate this up back then, right? I mean, we don't do a lot of this over our ladies today. Maybe we should. I mean, the book probably said.
Sleep with yourself.
Oh, I didn't even laugh.
Even Romeo and Juliet, when you hear the old Shakespearean plays and stuff like that, we just don't do that. And maybe we lost something in, I hate the way dating has transitioned. And, we got to remember that a marriage wasn't always the way we have it. Most marriages were arranged. Now, this marriage is not. It's a love story that they meet each other and fall. But marriages up until the 1600s were, in fact, they're still arranged today. I worked, maybe 30, 40 years ago, I worked at Convex, and there was a couple. They both worked there. They were, I think, Indian. They were Hindu for sure. And they were married. And I talking to them to get to know them. There was an arranged marriage. Her parents and his parents arranged their marriage. And of course, this was in the 90s, right? So it's the early 90s. But yeah, and I think that still exists today. We think that's so odd and foreign, but it's the norm. We are the unusual, our courtship process. And I say that to say, I think our courtship was good at one time, but today, courtship is not good. It's just, people don't court enough.
I heard a preacher use that the last sentence there, burns like a blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Use the fire, like a fire in a fire pit, burns and it keeps you warm and it keeps you safe and whatever, and it gives you light. But it was talking about how in a marriage that if an ember came out of that and started to burn, that you would have to control it because it could get bigger and bigger and bigger and cause marriages to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Nope, that's good. No, that's true. So the Hebrew word, we always look at what is the Hebrew word for this. The good thing about this is both the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint, the Greek Bible, and the Vulgate, the Latin Bible, all use the same name, Song of Songs. And remember, most of the books in the Old Testament in Hebrew are named after the first couple words of the Bible. And that's true with this book as well. Song of Songs, they just said, sounds like a good, of course it's in Hebrew, but it's the Hebrew name for it. And sometimes the Greek and the Latin Vulgate, they get tricky and they change it to something more meaningful to them. And then that translates to an English word is why we get our name for the Bible, for that particular book in the Bible. This stays true with all, with Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and then English, and probably German, French, and all the other translations that exist out there. They're all called the same name, Song of Songs, same meaning at least. So, I did an overview of this book to kind of get you guys to get the flow here, and it kind of flows, as you can see, from 3 phases. It starts out with broken up into the top row there, where it starts as a courtship. Remember, Solomon is out there and he sees this shepherd woman, and she's beautiful to him, and he starts to address her and starts courting, and chapters 1, 2, and 3 up to verse 5 is all about this courtship. And if you read those chapters, it's back and forth. Her description of him, his description of her. In fact, there's well, we'll get to that in a minute, the characters in there. So it's all this courtshipping, and then it moves on, and that courtship matures, and they're finally going to get married. And 3 through 5 is all about that. They're getting serious, they're proposing, they're talking about their future and marriage. It's interesting to me, and this has nothing to do necessarily with the book, and more has to do with man. If you were going to make a chapter split, would you take this book and split that at chapter 1, verse 1? If it's truly blocked off as a courtship, then we're talking about the marriage, I would have caught it off at the last verse of chapter 4, and 5 would have started the new one. But anyway, pet peeve of Scott, I'm thinking, really? Stop it at the very first verse of chapter 1. Okay, because we read things in chapters. Now that we know that the Bible wasn't made up with chapters and verses. That came much, much later. Whoever much later said, let's just take a dart and let's started there, Anyway, so, and then it moves on after the wedding. It moves on to the bulk of the book, 5 through 8, and it's about the marriage maturing. And the problems they have, and there's a dream that goes on in there. So it breaks those 3 sections up there, and then the next one breaks it up into these 5 emphases where the bride muses about her loved one. It's like I said, all of this stuff. When I was trying to say, how do you teach this? You almost, if you guys had your Bible, I'd almost say, okay, someone read some of these verses, because you can almost pick any page in this book and it's just going to be flowery stuff about, each other. But anyway, so, and then this thing says, it breaks it up into the speakers too. So you got I like the bride. She calls him, Solomon, her lover, darling. He calls her lover. And I want to know a little more. Who has pet names for their spouses here? And what are some of them? Okay, mine all start. I've called Kim Babe since we were 15. And I know it's probably a very highly used name for your wife or your girlfriend, or Babe. But anyone brave enough to say what they call each other? Not when you're mad. I mean,
Call her Mary Grace, because that was Gomer's girlfriend on the.
Mary Grace, I love it.
Babe was a good one, for sure.
Babe, yeah, I've always used Babe. Sweet. I think my daughter calls her love or something. Anyway, so different people have these names, and they have theirs as well. So she calls him darling all throughout the book. He calls her lover all throughout the book. So, and it goes, so like you can see, this breaks this up into the 5. She's talking to him, and then it moves to him talking to her, and then the wife, now they've moved to the marriage, she's talking to him again, and then he's the husband, he's talking to her, and then there's a duet where they talk together. It ends in a climax where they both back and forth in a duet. This was where I get it. It's like an opera, because that's kind of how an opera, because we're going to add now a chorus in there where they have like a choir in the background. In fact, let's just get to that right here. The characters in this book, we have the bride, which is a Shulamite woman. It's specific in the book. It calls out that she's a Shulamite woman. And then we got the groom. Not everybody thinks, but I think it's Solomon. And so does this chart, obviously. I stole this too. You guys know I just find these things. I don't make these.
I like it.
So, and then we have a unified chorus. Every now and then throughout the book, they're called the Brides of Jerusalem, I think. Did I write that? The Daughters of Jerusalem, I'm sorry. So when it's going through this book and they participate, it says, and then the Daughters of Jerusalem join in and they start singing their own little section of that book. So those are really the 3 main characters of this book. Either the bride is singing, the groom is singing, or they're doing a duet, or they've got this background choir behind them. Almost, I'm making that up, but singing. But that's how the story flows, in words. So it's pretty interesting here.
NIV actually calls them friends.
Friends. Yeah, I like that because back to every time I see foreshadowings of Christ in here, and these things jump out at me. So you got a wedding, and you got a bride and a groom. Christ is the groom, the church is the bride. And then we have friends that are invited to the wedding. And of course, in Matthew 25, when it talks about the 10 bridesmaids, 5 have oil, enough oil, 5 don't have oil. Those are the friends of the bride. Or the friends of the groom at that time, I think in that story. And they all are not allowed into the wedding, right? I could teach on that. I could teach on the whole Olivet discourse, but we're not going to. But it's a picture. I guess I say that to say this: you've got as a foreshadowing of Christ, you've got Jesus as the bride of the church, or the groom of the church. The church is the bride, and then the friends are either they're Old Testament saints, tribulation saints, and angels. Those are the people that are going to be in attendance in the marriage supper of the Lamb. I'm sure you guys have heard about the marriage supper of the Lamb. All of this I can get probably too deep into because I'd need to bring in a bunch of backup scripture. But when you're reading, I say that all to say this: when you're reading the Song of Songs, the more you know about things like that, the more you know about a Jewish wedding, the better you'll understand this book. The more you know about the relationship between the church and Christ as it's described as a marriage, the more you'll know, the better you'll read this book.
So you said Old Testament saints, tribulation saints, and angels?
Those are the 3 possibilities. Now, people say it's also the church-wide, but I don't like that at all. I think that breaks it all over the place. So the Shulamite, I just kind of wanted you guys to get your mindset on where this is taking place. You've got Solomon, his home's in Jerusalem at the palace and the temple. Her home, the Shulamite woman, they think is from Shunem up there. And so Solomon was going through his land, and the Jezreel Valley goes through there, where they would have been herding their sheep and stuff. And that's where they met. So as you're reading this story, when the shepherdess, the Shulamite woman, meets the shepherd boy, they meet up here. And then they have this whole love story going on where the courting's going on. And then when he has to go away, he has to go back down to here. And when he returns to go get her, then he has to go back up there. Of course, he leaves as a shepherd and he comes back as a king. So
that actually still exists today, right?
oh yeah, all these towns still exist today.
Is it? Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say in the map. I've been looking at it. It looks like it's near. Like if you're overlooking the Valley of Armageddon, you can probably see that.
Well, it would be over this way in the valley, in the Armageddon, Valley of Armageddon, Megiddo. So I brought this up because when we were going through Kings, we remember this. We remember another Shulamite lady she was a wealthy widow. Or no, she wasn't a widow. She was a wealthy woman. She was married, but she was childless. And remember, she met Elijah, and when he was passing through, her and her husband built that room in the upper room for her. And every time he'd come by, he'd stay there. They'd feed him. But then he wanted to know, what can I do for you? And found out she was childless, so he blessed her to have a child. And so she had a child. Later on, her child dies. He comes back to her there. He brings her back to life. All those stories we did through Kings, it existed. It happened right up in here, though. So it nothing to do with this Song of Songs. just the area that we're dealing in. It had to do with that. So in the rural setting up there. So here's another. I wanted to just show you kind of the flavor of how this was going. So she's singing to her lover up there in the verses 2, 3, and 4. Then the friends. This is where the friends or the brides of Jerusalem, they start singing, and then he starts singing back to her. So this back and forth, because this whole book is like this. There was a group of people, of course, before I say that too, let him kiss me, you know, the marriage kiss, think about our marriages. When we get married, right after you're married, what does the pastor or whoever's marrying you say to you?
Yes.
You may now kiss the bride. We seal our marriages with a kiss, and they were sealing their marriages with a kiss way back. That's probably where we get it. I didn't research that to find out if that's true or not, but tradition is you may now kiss your bride. So,
Oh,
But-
that one. Oh, yeah.
And then number
Like give
9.
you my darling to a mirror amongst barrister, cheeks are beautiful to ring. Okay, go on.
no,
There are beautiful horses.
yeah, and interesting enough, Solomon, as we studied his life, loved horses. He had a huge collection of horses, right? He collected them from all over the world. So to him, that was probably a compliment. You know, yeah, eyes like a dove and a mare. I brought that up earlier. You know,
I like the dove one though, because when you look at what that means, you know, doves can only focus at one thing at one time.
right. Yeah.
So he was really focused on.
yeah.
I thought that was cool.
No.
And they made once for life. That was just extra, not invisible.
No, that's good. No, yeah. So if we were going to be teaching this chapter by chapter, verse by verse, there are so many places. In fact, that's where this book gets, I think, not more difficult to teach, because it's remember, as the story goes, as courtship to marriage to wedding to marriage, right? So it's all in the confines of a biblically appropriate relationship, but it had opposition, and that's my next chapter. There was a group called Essenes. Now, most of you guys, if you read the Bible, you know there's Old Testament groups called Pharisees and there's Sadducees, but there was also another group, probably not as big as the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but they were Essenes. And they had their philosophy was asceticism. And that means we know that as, like, if we were to compare it to monks. Monks in the New Testament have taken a vow not to have any pleasures or luxuries or anything like that. That's what this group was in the Hebrew frame. And they were the ones that really had a problem with this book. They wanted it out of the Bible. And of course, the Pharisees, some very famous, you could read Hebrew history, and there was a number of very, very popular Pharisees that defended the reason this book should stay in. And basically it's what I said earlier, well, the word Yahweh, God's name, is not in this book. It screams about God. It's a picture of God's love and a right relationship in the confines of marriage. So the Essenes lost, which is a good thing. You know, God wanted this book in here for a reason. So how many people have heard or sat through a class that's taught this whole book? I don't think I have. I don't think I've ever been in a class that someone taught this book. Now, my pastor back in the 80s thought it was funny. Back in the day, I was a deacon in that church, and we had to read the scripture that he was going to teach on. And he chuckled because it was my turn, and he had me read scripture, and I was in my 31 something. I was probably 30, 31, something like that. And he just thought it was funny that I had to get up and read the verses that he was going to cover. He was teaching on marriage, so he did preach on marriage, and he used scripture out of this book. But it's not a very popular book to be taught out of. It's not one that most of us have heard messages from or teaching out of.
So are you struggling, Scott?
I practiced reading that because it's not my favorite thing to do. It's funny that God's got a sense of humor, because I hated to publicly speak. I used to in school, like in a spelling bee, miss the word on purpose just so I could sit down and get out of the limelight. I did not like to be out in front and then so God thought it was funny to put me in a position that I do teach or I speak. It's not my favorite thing to do. But yeah, back then it was even worse. So I did practice my reading. So this group lost, but interesting enough, even though they did not get it out of the canon, there has been over the centuries lots of restrictions put on this book, even in Christianity. I mean, there are what's the group that doesn't like technology and in Christianity?
High power.
Amish. The Amish is like, they put restrictions on the reading of this book, age appropriate. Like you have to be 21 before you're allowed to read this book in the Bible, which is kind of funny, So, because I don't think it's that bad, but it is intimate. It is an intimate book and stuff. So, it's amazing how much pushback has been, both Hebrew and even Christian pushback on the reading of this book. With that said, that just from those couple groups, or groups of Christians and Hebrews, but this book is part of the Megillah. Megillah is just a Hebrew word for scrolls. It's part of the 5 Megillah scrolls that are read every single year at the feast. You guys should probably recognize some of these feasts. Remember, there are 7 appointed days. They call them Moedims. There's 7 Moedims. Inside those 7 holy days, there are 3 major feasts. And we remember them as the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is in spring. And then you have the Feast of Pentecost. And then you have the Feast of Tabernacles. In those 3 feasts, they're in here. Now, this chart and even tradition, it's kind of good that this chart does it, but the very, very first, where Song of Solomon is read or sung, every year the Hebrews read and sing this song, and it says the 8 days of Passover. Well, if we've read the Bible, we know there's no such thing as 8 days of Passover. There's only one day. Passover's on the 14th of Nisan every year. One day, it's an event where the sacrificial lamb is made for the sins of the whole nation. We know Jesus died on Passover for the sins of the world on the cross. It's a one-day event. The day after Passover, on the 14th, is the 15th of Nisan. Funny how that works. And that starts the first day of a 7-day feast that we know as unleavened bread. Over time, they just brought it all together and called it an 8-day feast. So it's a single day of Passover on the 14th, spelled out in the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And it says it's a single day, and then there's a 7-day event. Now it just looks like an 8-day feast altogether. And they call it Passover, so we kind of lose the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is what the real feast's name is, Feast of Unleavened Bread. So anyway, I say all that to say, this was read during that period of time. They had books that they read. The Feast of Tabernacles, which is the fall feast. Ecclesiastes, the one we just read, or we just taught. That's read during the Feast of Tabernacles. The 9th of Av, it's AB, but I don't want to go into it, but Hebrew is AB, sounds like a V. It's spelled AV or AB anyway. It's pronounced the 9th of Av. Lamentations, which is the 3rd book in the major prophets. We got Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations. Jeremiah writes Lamentations. They read that whole book in the 9th of Av. Anybody know, any historians or studies what the importance of the 9th of Av is to the Hebrews?
I've heard of them. I can't remember.
There's so much, guys. The 9th of Av, the primary reason that they celebrate they don't celebrate, they remember these days, is the first temple in 586, Solomon's temple. Guess what day it was destroyed? The 9th of Av. You want it more weird? 70 AD. The second temple's destroyed by the Romans. Guess what day the Romans destroyed that temple? The 9th of Av. If you look at disasters to the Jewish nation, there's like 5 or 6. Of course, the 2 majors that they remember is the destruction of both their temples. 586 BC and 70 AD, both their temples were destroyed on the day of 9th of Av. So anyway, so they do this.
They lament.
They do lament. That's why they lament on that day. And I could do a whole hour on the disasters tied to the 9th of Av. And then you have Ruth, that's done on Pentecost. Pentecost is the early summer, late spring feast. It's a 1-day feast. And then Purim. Remember Purim, they read Esther. Very appropriate, right? Because It's all about celebrating. That's where they got that word from. Esther saving the nation from the destruction, right? The whole destruction. The Persians were going to allow that free day to kill Hebrews that day. Anyway, so that's study. So all these things are read, and the Song of Solomon is read on the Feast of Unleavened Bread there after Passover. What did I do here? Feast scrolls. I kind of already covered this. I put up some scriptures here, obviously, to tie my thinking, because this is kind of where I'm driving this, of the marriage. And so God has, and I don't have time to go into this either, but God the Father was married to the nation of Israel. He's called the husband and they're called the wife. But Jesus is the groom and we are the bride. So you've got God married to Israel. God's tabled Israel temporarily when they rejected Jesus, when he came as their Messiah and they rejected him on Palm Sunday, they rejected him. He turned them, and on Pentecost, he created his bride. The church was created on Pentecost. The bride was created on Pentecost. So there's lots of interesting stories on how God is the husband of Israel and Jesus is the groom of Christ. Just know that those exist out there. That seems like a dichotomy, but it's not.
So who's the marriage feast of the Lamb for?
The bride, Jesus, or it's for the marriage feast of the Lamb is for the bride, the church. And that's where we are the guest of honor, the bride, and then all the friends are all the Old Testament saints. And so anyway, throughout the Bible, this description of God's relationship with mankind, whether it's the nation of Israel or the church, is described as a marriage, as we can see. That's why this book is so appropriate, because it really details the love that God has for us. And I've added a bunch here more. I was thinking we would go through Elias, but we're not going to be able to. You'll get these. I recommend you read these verses and kind of apply it to this book as you're reading this book. And then we have this one. It kind of tells us the different. We already talked about it being broken up into how it flows from a courtship to a wedding to the marriage, the actual maturing of a marriage, and then we've got a bunch of the Aramaic poetry sprinkled throughout all of this. So this chart we're not going to go through this chart because we don't have time, as it's just going through the flow of the book. This is a good overview of the flow of the book, of how the book flows. I wanted to get into the different, that gets me to this one. I kind of use this picture. It's hard to tell what this picture means. It's hard to tell what this book means. And these are the four different, I don't want to say opinions. What would you say? Maybe opinions of what this book. The first is it's a literal book between a man and a woman, and that's the whole point of the book. It's a love story between a man and a woman, and how it evolves from courtship to a wedding to marriage, and that's all it is. That's what some people. This is strictly that. Others, number two, the second opinion out there is that they call it the shepherd. These have the literal, the shepherd, the allegorical, and the topological. The shepherd is my least favorite. I don't like it at all, in fact. It's a story of a man, a shepherd boy, who falls in love with the shepherd girl, and Solomon sees the shepherd girl and thinks she's beautiful and tries to win her away from the shepherd boy. And Solomon's a real cad for this. It's kind of like David with Bathsheba, right? Where David saw Bathsheba and she was married, and then he took her and got her pregnant, and he tried to kill her. He tried to get her husband, to sleep with her, but he wouldn't, so he ends up killing her husband. It's a horrible story, right? Horrible. And they interpret this book as kind of like that, where Solomon sees this boy and this girl fall in love, but he wants her, and he tries to win her over. Don't like that at all. But people pick that because, like I said, when you're reading the middle of this book, it doesn't sound like Solomon. So they go, well, it can't be, must be someone else. So they make up this whole thing, which, anyway. No, and then we got the allegorical, where this talks about, from a Jewish perspective, the allegorical one is split in two. The Jews see it as God's love for Israel, and the Christians see it as Christ's love for the church. So, and then you got the topological, which is, I'll just say right now, that's kind of the way I fall on this, is the topological. We're going to go through these one at a time and take a look at them real quick here. The royal love story, that's all it is, where if you read this literally, you can read this just as a man loving a woman. And it still screams of a biblical relationship as it flows to the way a relationship is supposed to work. What's that song about love? First come marriage, then comes baby in a baby carriage. What's that old?
1970s, man. I can't.
No, it's older than that, right? This is one of those.
60s, I guess.
Give me a little. Oh gosh, guys, you guys don't know this song, you know?
Yeah,
Okay, anyway, yeah.
He's seriously before our time.
I sure you do.
Anyway, I should have given me something to remember that song. At least how it started. Then I could have remembered it. It's an old kids thing. Kids always said that song about the order. I say that to say
Oh, so it's not a popular song.
no, not at all. It's not even a song. It's a little.
Nursery
It's
rhyme.
a nursery rhyme. Thank you.
It's ing.
Yes.
So and so and so and so.
Yes. It's a nursery rhyme.
Comes love, then comes marriage, then comes marriage, and a baby. marriage.
That's exactly what I was trying to think of. Thank
I don't know the
you.
first part.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
Say that, Eric, John.
So and so sitting in a tree.
Tree.
K-I-S-S-I-N-G.
That's it.
First come love, like that's this view of this book that's the proper order of a love, relationship between a man and a woman and what it should end up with. If that's all this was, I would love it if our world today followed this book's truth, right? Because this is not the way American or Western dating, forget America, I guess the whole world anymore, that is not that is not the frame or sequence of relationships in today's world. So anyway, but that's this particular view, that's how it sees this book. And I think it's appropriate. I'm okay with this interpretation if all you want to do is understand it this way. I talked a little bit about the shepherd hypothesis already. I don't like it at all. You got Solomon up there. It's just, I think it steps all over this book. I don't like that, but it's out there. If you go read a commentary, you could fall on a commentary out there on the internet that's going to describe that book. This is the purpose and the meaning of that book.
Loyalty over wealth and power.
Yeah, and that's the honor of it is that the hero of it is the Shulamite woman, because she doesn't let wealth, power, and influence deter her from her one true love. That's the storyline of how they interpret this book. And they do this because there's a dream. In this book, you've got the courtship going on, then you have the wedding, or he goes away, before the wedding, he goes away, and then she has this dream, and she's gone to bed, and her lover, the boy, or Solomon, I think, comes and calls her name. And she goes, in her dream, she says, I've already put my night clothes on, I'm going to say pajamas. She doesn't use that, but that's, I can't remember the word. I've already put my pajamas on. Go away, And so then he shakes the door handle in the dream, and her heart starts beating for him. And so her second excuse is, I've already washed my feet. So it goes through the excuse. But then when he shakes the door, then when he shakes the handle, her heart starts beating. So she goes to the door, and he's gone already. So now she flees to look for him.
And her feet are dirty.
She can't find him, and the night watchman sees her and beats her. Because she's out in the streets in the middle of the night, and she should be out there. This is all in her dream, and of course, I was gonna say about Kim dreams about me all the time, and normally I get hit when I get woken up, so I did whatever wrong in the dream. But that's her dream. This dream that she has of her lover is her insecurities. Because all about her dreams, she can't find them, you know, and she's searching for them, and all the trials that she goes through. Some people, if they don't interpret this as a dream, they try to shoehorn in, you know, a different interpretation for that. But you got to understand as you're reading that, that's a dream. Because it doesn't say, and then she dreamed, blah, blah, blah. You just have to know that it's a dream. Anyway, so. The next one is the allegorical one. I'm okay with this one too, because as I said, I see foreshadowings all through this book. All 8 chapters has different foreshadowings of Christ. Of course, the foreshadowings is if you're the nation of Israel, you're seeing this as a love between God, the Father, and the nation of Israel. But if you're believers like we are, we already know that we are the bride of Christ, and we see the foreshadowing, these pictures of love as Christ for his church. So I'm okay with this. But my interpretation, how I overlay this to this book, is the topological one. And that's because it kind of combines both it's a picture of a love between a man and a woman, which it is, and it has the foreshadowings of the allegorical. So we get the literal and the allegorical. And the topological view doesn't have to pick either one. Sometimes when, you know, you go through eschatology especially, we always say you either have to interpret the Bible literal or you interpret it allegorical. And of course, the most popular way for eschatology is allegorical. Catholics, Methodists, so many people teach this allegorical. The problem with allegorical is there's no anchor, right? You float all over the place. Literal, you understand the Bible to say what it says and mean what it says, and you don't try to alter with allegorical, you know, pictures and stuff. But in this case, I think you can do both. You can do it. I believe all the Bible should always be read literal. What's that saying? When the plain sense makes sense, seek no other sense, lest you end up with nonsense. And of course, I didn't come up with that. That's been said, that's been quoted by Lamb Line Ministry. That's been Jan Merkel's. A lot of people, and I think they got it from someone else. So it's been out there a long time, but it's true. You know, the whole Bible should be read literally, unless absolutely pushes you toward an allegory. Like when Jesus describes him, he's the door, right? Well, he's not a door. Clearly, that's a picture. And in this case, I think this book is very valuable to people to read, to understand what a love relationship between a husband and a wife should be, and in a foreshadowing way, what a love relationship between God and us is. So I think the way to interpret this is both those ways. Why did I put this back in here? I already had this. I was going to pull it back into another story, but I can't remember why I put it in there, so we're just going to go by it. So the courtship, attractions, purity, anticipation, according. Not exactly sure I did this one either, guys. Oh, the wedding. Yeah. So so the 2 ways I was going to teach us, and I decided on basically this way of breaking it out, the 4 ways people see this book. And then the other way you can teach this book, and I thought about doing it, and I would have done the whole book this way, is I would have dove into all the scriptures. Another way you can do this, but there's the 3 sections we talked about. It's broken up into courtship, and we would go and dissect all the courtship scriptures and see what those relationships are about. And we talk about that whole focus of that section of the book in the courtship. And then we'd move on to the marriage one, and we would focus on all the marriage scriptures in the book, on what it's talking about, you know, evolving love into a more mature, you know, Kim and I loved each other, and of course we thought we did at 15 and 16, and we did. And we still love each other here 48 years later, but it's a different type of love, right?
It's 28 years later?
48. And actually, when we were dating, it's probably 50. It's 50 years later, but
28.
we've been married 48. I know,
It's close math, right?
what's that thing?
Come on.
28 good years now. And so the marriage evolves into a more mature love. It's not the physical attraction anymore. It's the spiritual attraction of the heart. It is still. I'm sorry. That's said wrong. I know. In most courtships, the initial attraction is physical, and then as you get to know someone and grow in love, it's still a physical attraction, but the inner love becomes the binding glue that keeps the marriage together. Because I've seen people in a marriage, two very attractive people, and they're having struggles getting divorced. They no longer see each other as beautiful because of their inner relationship, because they don't have that glue. The mature relationship stays together because the glue, the maturing love for who you are, your spirit, your personality, your all those things. And that's what this book kind of goes through. And then it would have ended up in the actual marriage. In this whole section, we'd have gone over struggles. There's struggles in every marriage. And if you don't have that strong binding bridge, this is what breaks marriages up. When I say the 12-year itch or the whatever, those things are nothing more than not understanding what courtship and the maturing marriage is supposed to keep it. What's supposed to keep that marriage solid and together? They fall out of love. So this kind of, I'm just going to leave this chart as we got people poking in here. This is the model marriage here of how it goes through. Marriage is a picture of Christ and the church. And I kind of alluded to that. I wanted to kind of get more deep on that and that picture, but due to time, I've kind of zoomed by it a little bit. This is a great book.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So why did you choose to teach us the structure of it versus the content and how it would apply in our own areas?
Because I thought that would take, if I did that, I would have taught at minimum a week on courtship, a week on the wedding, and a week on a maturing marriage. There's no way I would have done justice pulling scriptures out of there, because the way this is written, in the epistles are written to us how we live the Christian life. I can go there and grab 3 verses and teach that content. In this book, there is nowhere you're going to go and grab 3 verses and teach it. It's an opera. It's like saying, I'm going to come in the middle of an opera and only watch 15 minutes of it and leave. You're not going to understand, enjoy anything. And that's this book. You can't do that. You have to teach it in either the whole or sections, not verse by verse. Almost. Okay. Anyway. So, any other questions?